Right, it's time for this. Here we go. Every day this week, because we didn't get the feature to fit, it's Spirit in the Archive. We're going on up. It's Lara Spirit in the Archive. Every election since 1832, Lara Spirit's been taking us through them, and Lara Spirit Red Box Editor is here. How are you, Lara?
I'm good, thank you, Matt. How are you?
I'm very good. I'm very good. Now, we're talking about the 2005 general election today. Obviously, 2001 we did yesterday. William Hague led the Tories to a crushing defeat, another triumph for Tony Blair. In the meantime, Tony Blair invades Iraq, and so obviously is then punished by the voters.
Yes.
But
the extent of his punishment is the interesting thing. And actually, obviously, knowing what we know about British elections since, it's quite amusing sometimes reading the coverage from 2005, the idea that a majority over 60 would be seen as extremely destabilising, which, of course, in this case, it was. But at the time, it was taken as a real mark of a lesser enthusiasm from the electorate for Tony Blair, and a real indictment, I think, of his political authority.
And I suppose we should say, in the meantime, after William Hague stood down after the 2001 defeat, the Tories worked their way
another
through.
one.
I know it's hard to believe, but the Tories changed their leader between elections.
Yeah. So we are now at Michael Howard at this point.
Because Ian Duncan Smith turned up the volume, and then they turfed him out.
Before an election, indeed, yeah.
So when you've been looking in the archive, to what extent did Iraq play a part in that election? And how much of it was just a sort of... people were still relatively happy with what was going on, and so didn't feel the need. It was not yet time for a change.
Well, the Times is interesting. On the day of the election, there is quite a lot of chatter in its pages about how the commentariat, so to speak, probably care more about Iraq, or have done during the election campaign, than they feel those in the wider public might. It's not a hugely exciting election campaign. It's another one in which turnout is one of the big questions, and it's well below the 75% post-war average, just above 60% in this election. It's not seen as a hugely exciting election campaign. And I think a testament to that is the front page of the Times on the day of the election, which just has a big yawning baby with a rosette with Anne Milton, of course, former MP standing in Guildford.
It's an amazing picture,
which is a really great and slightly disturbing picture, I must say. That's in the bundle that I sent you. There's also a really inexplicable, I don't know if you can explain, well, maybe it's not inexplicable, but there's a Skoda advert in the Times page which says, "Feels John Prescott, costs Gordon Brown." Are you looking at this? A full-page advert of a Skoda car, which is trying to make some joke about how
some people need little luxuries, like rear acoustic parking sensors. And so others need a car with those top-of-the-range features to cost from as little as... Oh, so I think it's saying that John Prescott is the luxury boy. He wants all the luxury things. But Gordon Brown is Mr...
Is the penny pincher.
Yeah. It doesn't make a lot of sense, that.
Doesn't make
we should say 2005 was an election where lots of people came in. David Cameron came in 2001. Who else came in 2005?
Well, there are quite a few people who leave in that election, and I think, who is elected for the first time in this election? I think there's only 2 or 3. I did a Red Box question on this the other day. Female Conservative MPs who still remain in the Commons and were elected at this time. I think fewer than 5, and obviously Anne Milton no longer, but she was one of the longer-standing ones that came in during that time.
And the Times did a big night bingo, sort of bingo cars. We've done that before. And,
there's a great quote of the night from Baroness Thatcher. I think this is worth mentioning because of the recent argument over whether Keir Starmer was right to praise her. But Baroness Thatcher on the night says, "I've been a Conservative all my life and the Conservatives are right for the country. I wish Michael Howard very well. That said, this Labour Party have done quite a lot more of what we would have done than any previous Labour government. Blair has a long way to come to be purely Thatcherite. I would not like to predict his place in history."
Really interesting.
Isn't that brilliant?
Just so let's take a listen. This is Tony Blair celebrating his third election victory in 2005.
It's a tremendous honour and privilege to be elected for a third term, and I'm acutely conscious of that honour and that privilege. When I stood here first 8 years ago, I was a lot younger but also a lot less experienced. Today, as well as having in our minds the priorities that people want, the government, has the experience and the knowledge, as well as the determination and commitment to deliver them.
And I suppose we should say, Lara, that did then herald the modernisation of the Tory party. That Michael Howard stayed on afterwards and, basically to try and help David Cameron become leader. And, this is a big turning point in terms of the national politics.
Yeah, and the Times leader the day after does mention that it is needed to modernise, and this is a good push towards that. And Matthew Parris, in one of his articles, saying that actually that task has already begun, and that it was a kind of creditable campaign in which Michael Howard made some effort to go in that direction. So you're right, obviously after this point the fortunes of the party do pick up, and of course even though their final vote tally isn't hugely up or promising, there are some big wins for them in the campaign, and a very good night for Theresa May, who there's a big profile of having increased her majority in Maidenhead by a fair amount, and a number of praising comments for her obviously well-known fashion sense. So
it is amazing, the coverage of it. Phil Webster's front page story. Tony Blair will limp back into Downing Street today after securing a third Labour term, but with a severe rebuff from voters over the Iraq War.
Imagine if Rishi Sunak won a 60-plus seat majority.
Third. If Rishi Sunak won a third general election after serving a full term. He's limping back,
He's limping.
Limping.
Yeah, there's an article the next day saying, Labour HQ already questioning the future of Tony Blair. I think an article from Peter Riddle says, the premiership of Gordon Brown has in some senses already begun.
Yeah. But it would be there for another 2 years. Amazing. Lara Spirit, good to see you. Lara will be back for the best of the rest. What do you think is going to happen at PMQs?
No idea. What do you think is going to happen in PMQs?
Tim Shipman, what do you think is going to happen at PMQs?
Well, it's the end of term, so they're all going to lay out their big arguments, aren't they? And there'll be some Mickey taking and some festive jokes, and
I feel like we need some sort of noise.
I feel like at least
Keir
one of
Starmer
them's going to be
needs
limping into the chamber, though, to steal the phrase.
Do we think Keir Starmer's going to attempt any jokes after last week's fiasco?
I really hope not. They were the worst yet, weren't they?
They were really bad
so
last
far.
week.
It was a game of two halves, wasn't it? The first half was all right. The second half was bad.
Well, get on your YouTube. So we're on the YouTube now. Get on the Times Radio YouTube channel. Search for Times Radio on the YouTubes. You can hit subscribe. And then, we're live now. Hello from between Bristol and Yate, says Carl. Ross says hello from Guildford. Tom says hello from Hampshire. David's in Derby. Candy is in upstate New York. Timothy's in Barcelona. Get online right now. It's the last PMQs of the year. Tim Shipman, chief political commentator of the Sunday Times, is here. Ayesha Hazarika, off of Times Radio, who not only used to brief people and write the jokes for PMQs, she wrote a book about it as well. So we are live on Times Radio, live on the Times Radio YouTube channel. PMQs Unpacked is next here on Times Radio.
On DAB digital radio, on the Times Radio app, and on your smart speaker. Politics from every angle. Times Radio.
It's 12 o'clock. I'm Matt Chorley, and this is Times Radio. In a moment, we'll bring you PMQs Unpacked, but first a look at the headlines this lunchtime. Mark Drakeford has announced he's going to step down as the First Minister of Wales and the leader of Welsh Labour in March. A new party leader will be elected before Easter, who he said would hopefully work alongside a Labour government in Westminster. The US climate envoy John Kerry has said the agreement reached in Dubai is cause for optimism and gratitude. It calls on countries to transition away from fossil fuels. And a YouGov poll has suggested that Rishi Sunak's popularity is at minus 49, a drop of 10 points since late November. So Keir Starmer, the Labour leader, also saw his score fall 9 points to a net rating of minus 22. There'll be more news in an hour, but now live on Times Radio and here on the Times Radio YouTube channel. It's time for this.
PMQs Unpacked on Times Radio. Unpacking the politics and cutting through the crossfire.
Order, order. I call Matt Chorley and Tim Shipman.
And Tim Shipman is here for the last one of the year. Chief political commentator of the Sunday Times. Tim, how are you?
I'm very well indeed. That's pretty telling, that, isn't it? You know, the numbers for them both. We've got two sort of not very exciting people about to contest this who are viewed quite negatively by the public. One of them is going to be our Prime Minister next year for probably a protracted period of time. Now is the moment. Seize the day. Set the agenda as we go into the Christmas break.
And as it's the last one of the year, she's back. Ayesha Hazarika, off of Times Radio.
Hello.
You're here to guide us through and hopefully educate us in the structure of a Keir Starmer joke.
Come on, it's a bit it's a bit nasally,
you
isn't it?
You wrote them for Ed Miliband. I mean, surely.
That went well.
Now, if you weren't listening last week, I've just put it in. We've got a little roundup of some of Keir Starmer's jokes from last week. Let's just take a listen to some of these.
I would say that this treaty's got more holes in than a Swiss cheese, but I don't want to wind up the Prime Minister by talking about a European country again. Forget the private jet, he's obviously on a private planet of his own. From up yours to laws to take our money, Kigami.
Sorry, that's so bad, it's funny.
That last one got you. It was weird, though, last week, Ayesha, because he was quite good for 3 questions, really zeroing in on the detail that this Rwanda plan isn't going anywhere. Even if it does, it's only 100 people. What's the point of all of that? And then it just fell apart.
Yeah, then he sort of went into the sort of Uber bans. And of course, the week before, he'd had that really good PMQs. I think probably his best one yet. And I think very rarely does PMQs really cut through, but I think that week was a week that cut through because it spoke to a truth. I think what's happened, and I see this a lot with politicians, is that at the beginning they're really nervous about making jokes, and particularly like someone like Keir, who I know quite well, is a very, very nice guy. He's not Mr. Giggles, right, in terms of like Uber. He's not the Archbishop of Banterbury, right, put it that way. But I think once you get the kind of thrill of a couple of jokes that go well for you in the chamber, you can get a little bit addicted to it. I think sometimes there's a bit of sort of overreach. The other thing which is fair to say, even though us outside are like, oh, it was like a groan-a-thon, like in the chamber, God loves a trier. And I think like, your side, particularly Labour side, just gets so cheery if someone makes some effort, some semblance of a joke, they just kind of really go with it.
Mr. Giggles sounds a bit like a slightly sinister children's toy, doesn't it? That might have been
I
popular
was
in the
thinking-
80s, but would be inappropriate now.
Children's entertainer who hasn't passed his DBS checks.
Yes.
That's what I was thinking.
Who smells faintly of booze.
There was a poll running online. Who should write Keir Starmer's jokes? Ayesha, Matt, Tim or Lara? Ayesha is just edging ahead. You can get online and vote on that.
It's hardly fair. You're both stand-up comedians, so
That's very kind of you to say so, Tim.
well, I've watched you both do stand-up.
And that is
I
his
laughed
entirely
along.
factual review.
That was his ringing endorsement. That's
both
actually
very
when you
good.
do a gig and you come off and someone goes, how do you think that went then?
Yeah.
No, you actually both are sort of try to be funny and are, whereas I just do sort of speeches where people are pleasantly surprised if you say anything amusing. So,
And you probably get paid a lot more.
Obviously, a lot more money than we've made at our gigs. Right, here we go. Then let's find out. Has Keir Starmer been at the joke book again for the last time in 2023? We go live to the House of Commons for PMQs Unpacked. This is Keir Starmer.
Yesterday we heard of the tragic death of a young man on the Bibby Stockholm. I know the whole House will want to send our deepest condolences to his family and friends. We must never let this happen again. I would also like to mark the retirement of my colleague and friend, Mark Drakeford, the First Minister of Wales. Mark committed his life to public service and lives his values every day. Quietly and patiently, Mark has been a titan of Labour and Welsh politics, and we thank him for his service and wish him well. Mr. Speaker, Christmas is a time of peace on earth and goodwill to all. Has anyone told the Tory party?
Uh-oh.
here we go. It's bold. I like the ambition.
Mr. Speaker, Christmas is also a time for families, and under the Conservatives, we do have a record number of them, Mr. Speaker.
That's a joke. That's a five families joke.
Mr. Speaker, but it's important. At the beginning of the year, I set out some priorities that this government would deliver for the British people. And over the course of this year, we have, Mr. Speaker, inflation halved, Mr. Speaker, the economy growing, debt falling, action on the longest waiters, the boats down by a third, and crucially, as we heard from Honourable Friend, tax cuts coming to help working families in the new year.
Right, let's just pause it there and just get our breath back. Quite the gear shift from a death on the Bibby Stockholm, Mark Drakeford's resignation.
And I love the tribute to Mark Drakeford quietly getting... this is a man who obviously is incapable of speaking excitingly in public and has been quietly doing his job in a way that no one ever noticed. But well done him.
Well done him.
I'm disappointed he didn't mention Caerphilly cheese.
That was the only thing that everyone knows about Mark Drakeford, is a big fan of Caerphilly cheese. Christmas is a time for goodwill, peace on earth and goodwill to all men. How's it going in the Tory party?
At that point, we were all looking at each other going, oh, here we go. The joke placard goes up. Look, that is pretty standard fare. I think that's not a bad opening, bit of knockabout. Everyone at Christmas expects some really bad Christmas jokes. There's a whole there'll be a whole range of ugly sisters, grim brothers, all that sort of thing. It was fine. I mean,
I'll give him 5.2. He's just the right side of the line.
Yeah,
with that,
he kind of had to go in.
Also, it rings true. It's the sort of thing that he might have thought of himself.
Yeah. And it was really short.
And it was nice and short.
Authentically dad joke is what they're saying, essentially.
Rishi Sunak saying, Christmas is also a time for families, and in the Tory party we've got a lot of them. That's a five families joke.
That's actually a good joke.
It's not bad. It's Mark Francois and his weird five families Godfather thing. Although everyone seems to be in all of the families.
John Hayes is very prolific, is in at least 3 of the 5 families. Which means there may be a bit of interbreeding going on somewhere.
It's feeling a bit Mormon, isn't it?
But as the Times leader pointed out this morning, 5 factions on one wing of the Tory party.
Yeah.
Maybe 1 or 2 too many if you're going to achieve anything. And last night they didn't.
I want to just stick up for Rishi Sunak at this point and just say, actually, sometimes it's very good to anticipate an attack and own it. So I think he gets a point for that.
Then taking the dad joke and just using an excuse to rattle through your pledges. So, half inflation, economy growing.
I'm going to make a prediction. That may not be the last we hear of
the economy is not
rundown.
growing, though, as we discovered this morning. It shrunk in October. I'm not sure the debt is falling. And he's now saying he's focusing on the longest waiters.
Action on the longest waiters, which makes it sound a bit like he's personally going around and telling them, get out of your beds, so you're no longer waiting.
Again, that's slightly shifting from cutting waiting lists, because that's not altogether. And then some talk of tax cuts. So we've set the tone. This feels like knockabout end of year stuff.
Definitely. I know as well that Rwanda's economy is growing faster than ours is at the moment.
I'm not surprised with all the money.
All the money we've given them, yeah. All those new houses that have gone up, and
everyone's having a swimming pool.
I mean,
no NIMBYs in Rwanda.
Just what Suella Braverman spent on Toblerones at Kigali Airport is probably keeping that economy going. Right, let's go back to the House of Commons. This is question 2 from Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, he can spin it all he likes, but the whole country can see that yet again the Tory party is in meltdown and everyone else is paying the price. Now, he's kicked the can down the road. But in the last week, his MPs have said of him, he's not capable enough. He's inexperienced. He's arrogant. A really bad politician. When they're shouting, this is what they said. So, well, come on. Who was it who said he's a really bad politician? Hands up.
Well, I know, because it was in my piece.
They're shouting.
This is called proper panto.
Who was that? Or, and now there's got to be some hands for this, he's got to go. Oh, shy. Apparently, he's holding a Christmas party next week.
Order! It's Christmas. No, but you might not want the Christmas present that I could give you. So please, Keir Starmer.
Lindsay Hall, they're really cutting
Apparently
and ruining
he's
his
holding
flow.
a Christmas party next week. How's the invite list looking?
Oh, that would have been better if it had been for Lindsay Hall.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the honourable gentleman for all the comments. What I would say to him, he should hear what they have to say about him, Mr. Speaker.
It's not bad.
No, that's so weak. That's basically like your mum.
It is a bit.
That
is a bit your
like
mum.
that is a bit like in
Is that
betweeners.
it? Is he sat down again? Was that it? That was the full extent of his response. They should hear what they say about him. Wow.
Yeah, that's full-on Badul and Newman from, your mum.
That's you, that is.
That's you, that is.
You smell. See that thing on the floor?
That said, what is the purpose here today is for a guy who's had a pretty and utterly awful couple of weeks, and it looked like the stool might be being kicked out from under his swinging neck last night. He survived that. He just wants them to go home to Christmas and worry about their Toblerones rather than whether he's still their Prime Minister. And there was quite a big cheer for that really appallingly bad response. Tories have a low humour quotient.
Just
threshold, I would say.
Just remind us, the person who called him useless and arrogant had to go in your piece. Was that an unnamed person or a named person?
Unnamed member of the cabinet.
Right.
Gosh, that doesn't narrow it down, does it?
No.
But just in terms of that hands up thing, that is such a sort of classic device that I remember we loved doing that with Ed, because everyone slightly does get confused. It's just such a it's a sort of slightly rubbish device, but it does cause enough, because there's always some sort of pudding who does put their hand up because they think it's a sort of, you have to put your hand up. So that is just a slightly pantomime thing that.
But he did it quite well. He had he seemed sort of
bit of
swagger.
swagger.
Bit of swagger.
His face was a bit widow twanky, though, I would say.
There are times when, particularly when Keir Starmer's got his glasses on, he does look a bit like he could be like the Gran in Little Red Riding Hood.
Or Mrs. Doubtfire.
Yes, it's real Mrs. Doubtfire.
Little kind of, but you're right. He is enjoying himself. He's what an optic.
Now there's a challenge. Yeah. We got Zippy on. Can you get Mrs. Doubtfire?
Yeah, get John O'Farrell.
Well, the guy from the live.
Yeah.
Let's do that. Can we get Mrs. Doubtfire in? Right, very good. Let's go back to the House of Commons. I'm glad we're taking all this as seriously as they are. This is question 3 from Keir Starmer.
They've obviously found the donkey for their nativity. The search of 3 wise men may take a little longer. But while they fight amongst themselves, there's a country out here that isn't being governed, where more than 100,000 people are paying hundreds more a month on their mortgages. Energy bills going back up in January. The economy shrinking again. NHS waiting lists an all-time high. Doesn't he think the government would be better off fixing the messes they've already made rather than scrambling to create new ones?
Mr. Speaker, he talks about governing and spent the first 2 questions talking about political tittle-tattle, Mr. Speaker. What a joke. Well, let's get on to the substance, Mr. Speaker. Let's get on to the substance. He mentioned the things. What is the news that we've just heard in the last week? Well, what's the most important thing? The most important thing is education, Mr. Speaker, because that's how we spread opportunity in our country. And what have we learned? Where are the schools performing best in the United Kingdom? In England, Mr. Speaker, thanks to the reforms of this Conservative government, rising up the league tables, giving our kids the start they need. And where are they plummeting down? In Labour-run Wales.
Oh, poor Mr. Drakeford.
It's a good point, though. I mean, it's an interesting question as to whether, given that, Keir Starmer boasts on the record now having ousted Richard Leonard in Scotland because he was seen as a roadblock in the making.
Too Corbynite,
and basically being a bit useless. But Mark Drakeford's record in Wales, in terms of the attacks that the Tories can make, isn't great, whether it's on schools, NHS waiting lists, the row over 20 miles per hour.
Well, he was being very quiet. He should have shouted a bit louder by the sound of it.
But you know what I mean? So in terms of going into a general election next year, not having Drakeford there and a new person who can say, nothing to do with us, we're turning things around, it does remove some of the sting.
You're definitely going to... that's a Tory pivot, right? You're going to see Tories pivoting to Wales. They didn't mention Scotland, but I'm sure that will come up when Stephen Flynn stands up. He will use that again as a rejoinder and say, because the Scottish education system has really plummeted as well. But what I thought the donkey thing from Keir Starmer was pretty good. But what's very interesting was watching Keir Starmer clearly wanting to pivot back to the economy and cost of living, because the Tories and certainly Reform want to make this a sort of immigration election, and Labour has spent a lot of time talking about immigration because of Rwanda. They don't really want to be doing that. They want everything to pivot back to cost of living. So I thought it was quite an interesting pivot from Keir Starmer there.
And also, that line, why don't you fix the mess that you've made rather than scrambling to create another one? That feels like something that, could even be a line lifted from a focus group. There's sort of like, there's enough problems already. Why are they having this sort of bun fight? Interesting as well, Rishi Sunak now declaring education the most important thing. Not something we've ever really heard from him.
Well, he always sort of says that, but he's never really done very much about it.
But it's not one of his top
It's
five
not one
pledges.
of his pledges, no.
No great education reform, apart from some vague idea about doing maths till 18.
And let's not forget, we just had the nightmare of sending your little darling in school wearing a crash helmet in case a bit of the ceiling fell down on them. So, yeah.
We'll put some tinsel around it.
Whisper it quietly. It may suit both the Tories and Labour to have an argument about the economy rather than about immigration, because, as you say, that doesn't help the Tories with reform. And if Sunak can get in a position early in the year where he says, look, with these tax cuts are beginning to come through, the economy's turning around. They always were expecting a little blip in GDP this month, with it improving again next month. That might, Labour can say we'd spend the money better than you, and we care about this, and this that you don't care about, and they may, the best, most plausible election argument for the Tories is we're slightly turning the corner, don't let Labour go and screw it up. So it may suit them both to get onto that terrain ultimately.
And there are really interesting dividing lines against them both on, education's one area where Labour has got something interesting to say about it, controversial VAT on private schools. So, they'd be quite happy. Bridget,
whereas on immigration, it's not working for the Tories and Labour doesn't really have a policy. And that's it's a pretty arid area.
Tories I speak to are really frustrated. They don't talk about their education record more. That actually the growing up the PISA things, and a lot of it actually, because it takes so long, dates back to this reforms that Michael Gove did.
2010, isn't it?
And Nick Gibb, right? He did quite a good job of that.
Who got bumped off at the reshuffle. Right, let's go back then. This is question number 4 from Keir Starmer.
He talks about children. Nearly 140,000 children are going to be homeless this Christmas. That is more than ever before. That's a shocking state of affairs, and it should shame this government. Instead of more social housing, house building is set to collapse. Instead of banning no-fault evictions, thousands of families are at risk of homelessness. Rather than indulging his backbenchers swanning around in their factions and their star chambers, pretending to be members of the mafia, when's he going to get a grip and focus on the country?
Let's just look at the facts. Let's look at the facts, actually, because rough sleeping in this country is down by 35%, Mr. Speaker, since its peak, thanks to the efforts of this government. There are hundreds of thousands of fewer children in poverty today, thanks to this government, Mr. Speaker. And when it comes to home building, again, what are you doing? We just had the data this last week. In the last year, an almost record number of new homes delivered, Mr. Speaker, more than in any year of the last Labour government.
It's interesting how Keir Starmer has actually managed to pull this off. Like, Sarky joke.
He's now turned into attack line.
Yeah.
Pretending to be members of the mafia, mucking about. This is a serious business. I mean, the hilarious thing about this Five Families Mafia joke is that it was invented by a reporter for Mail Online and then embraced by the people in the mafia families who thought, oh, that's hilarious.
Without realising that in the film they all kill each other.
Yeah, and those of us old enough to remember when the senior people in the ERG started referring to themselves as the Grand Wizards, who, of course, used to run the Ku Klux Klan. Remember how these things can backfire sometimes, the sort of self-image of these people.
But in terms of the structure of that, Ayesha, what Keir Starmer is doing is he's getting the joke in, but then by pivoting to 140,000 children homeless this Christmas, he's sort of denying Rishi Sunak the opportunity to come back with a joke.
Yeah, and I actually think it's a structure that's really working for him, and it's very reminiscent for me, having prepared going up against him, of William Hague. Actually, William Hague used to do that. Was quite a tactic he used to do, where he would actually not just run on the same theme. He would go on different topics, but he would kind of get a joke in early, which made it very, very difficult to respond. I think it's really interesting that Starmer's chosen homelessness and child homelessness. That does work for him in a number of areas. It signals some left-wing credentials to bits of his movement that are feeling a bit bruised after the Thatcher comments and things like that. It's a bit of kind of sort of all-time religion for the Labour side of things. Also, Sunak is on kind of ropey ground on this because he can say, look, the rough sleeping figures have gone down. That is not how it feels in the country.
But also that is actually a different thing. So these figures are 140,000 children living in temporary accommodation, so without a home.
It's a classic Sunak
That's
response,
not
isn't it? Look at me, I know the numbers. Everything's fine.
Sleeping bags under. He's talking about something which is a bit near what we are, but not quite.
Strange ground to go on when his Home Secretary recently said that sleeping rough is a lifestyle choice. So, but that is very much, that Starmer again. I think that is him using PMQs quite strategically so that his people can say to the left of his party, look, he does care about these issues as well, the issues that we know you care about, the social justice issues.
I'm going to say so far so good.
Yeah.
The jokes aren't terrible. Interesting attack lines, but then Rishi Sunak pivot. Somebody just texted in saying, stop saying pivot.
Sorry,
Richard. Anyway, but Rishi Sunak pivoting to whatever it is that he wants to talk about. They're both, and if the aim of the game is sending your troops home with a spring in your step, they're both probably doing all right on that test.
They're
thus
both
far.
above their usual average, I would say.
Yeah, which is pretty bad. It's Matt Chorley on Times Radio with Tim Shipman and Ayesha Hazarika, bringing you PMQs Unpacked live on Times Radio and on the Times Radio YouTube channel, so you can watch along as well, so you can see their faces and ours. If that's what you want while you're having your lunch. Let's go back to the comments. It's question 5 from Keir Starmer.
140,000 children homeless this Christmas, and he's utterly tone deaf. Yeah. And the rise in homelessness shows how these Tory crises merge and grow and damage the country. Yeah. Families like the Bradys in Wiltshire, both parents working full-time, with 2 young children, forced out of their home of 15 years by a no-fault eviction, now living in their van. Or 11-year-old Liam Walker, homeless this Christmas. He wrote a letter to Santa saying, "Please, can I have a forever home? I don't want any new toys. I just want all my old toys out of storage. I just want us to be happy again." Is there anything that could shame this government into putting the country first? Then it's surely this little boy.
Mr. Speaker, if he really cared about building homes... No. If he really cared about building homes, when there was an opportunity in this House, Mr. Speaker, in this House, to back our plans to reform defective EU laws, to unlock 100,000 new homes, Mr. Speaker, what did he do? What did he do? He went in front of the cameras and said one thing and came in here and blocked it. Typical shameless opportunism.
Wow.
Wow.
I mean,
that escalated.
Quite. And this, I was talking yesterday to people who are potential rebels on this Rwanda stuff. They went to see the Prime Minister. And where some of them sort of went away happy, a lot of them didn't, because they felt that he was just sort of riding roughshod and saying, I'm right. And when I've got a strong opinion about where I'm right, you can all go hang. And that was just a classic example of a bad answer at the beginning. Maybe his side will give him some points for the way it concluded. But where was the counter story? Where was the... I know families like that in my own constituency. Yeah. And I'll tell you what helped them out. It was when we were able to build this or do that or whatever it was he wants to claim credit for. And you try and humanise your own side of the argument, and then you can hit him back with, and by the way, we did try to build some more homes and you didn't. But when you come across in the face of a sort of emotive question with a shrill response that basically says, I'm going to completely ignore what you've said and then have a pop at you, Starmer's right. It is tone deaf, and that's one of the things that Tory MPs find difficult to swallow about Rishi Sunak. He's a terribly clever bloke, but he hasn't learned how to sound like a human being.
I wonder, because somebody was, we were talking about this, I think maybe on the show yesterday or earlier in the week, Ayesha, because people go from, newly elected backbench MP to now Prime Minister in such record time, they don't sort of build up that sort of back catalogue of anecdote and experience, so that when you find yourself in a sticky situation, and maybe, Rishi Sunak bluntly didn't spend years on the back benches watching other people make these mistakes and learning from them. Very quickly, he was on the front bench himself. There was an answer to that question that was, this very sad story, and I read that story in the Mirror myself, and, my I'm sure hearts go out to them, and we have done this and this, but there's always more to do. We could all work together, but when we did bring that, there's just a
absolutely.
That is a choice. Yeah. The way he's chosen to answer that question.
I mean, I think Tim's used the right phrase. It's tone deaf, and I think what Rishi Sunak really struggles with is sometimes just being able to read the room and kind of read the mood of where things were. I mean, Keir Starmer didn't make a sort of jokey comment there. That he was going straight in for the heartstrings, the human story. You could picture that wee boy. And you're right, there's loads of places Sunak could have come back on. In fact, if I was Sunak and I was advising him, I'd say, look, what that boy needs and what his family needs more than anything is a really stable economy. We need to be able to, you could do what he doesn't need is sort of recklessness. Or you could do a whole thing like that. But to start yelling essentially about a measure which was allowing house builders to pump chemicals into rivers, it is such a sort of stretch. But to your point, Matt, I always remember, speaking to older Labour backbenchers when prepping Ed for PMQs and speaking to lots of people in the Lords as well who'd been former MPs. And you're right. Many people in the front bench now don't have that apprenticeship on the backbenches, where they even spend time sort of sitting, looking at how the craft of the Commons works, how you ask the right questions, what are the different sort of cadences of questions, what are the different moods in the sort of chamber. And I think you forget Rishi Sunak's really inexperienced. His team is really inexperienced as well. His political secretary was a journalist for The Spectator like 5 minutes ago. He hasn't got a lot of kind of seasoned, gnarly people around him who could say, look, sometimes you got to take it down a bit. Sometimes it's generally when I've prepped people, and I've prepped prime ministers as well, Gordon Brown and Harriet when she was acting for Gordon. What you have to do is you often judge you match your response to the tone of the question.
Yeah.
So if someone comes hard at you, you go hard back at them. If someone comes in with a more human interest, you take it down a bit. Whereas he sort of not understood that.
I remember there was once somebody asked Gordon Brown how much it cost to fill a car with petrol, and he started talking about barrels of oil. And that was a similar sort of detachment between, what was a very retail thing. People pointed out, but he doesn't drive because he can't, because of his eyes. But, that you do need to match those two things. Well, let's see if it gets any better in the final stages then. Their last set 2 of 2023. This is question 6 from Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. He hasn't finished. As the world's...
One more. Mr. Speaker, is that really his Christmas message to Liam? Cocooned in his party management breakfast. He just can't see the...
Order. Mr. Cleverly, please. It's Christmas. I want a little bit of silence.
So that's James Cleverly, the Home Secretary, being told off.
I'm going to get it one way or another, and that goes to each side. Keir Starmer.
Cocooned in his party management breakfast. He just can't see the country in front of him and what they've done. I'll finish by thanking hard-working families across Britain who kept our country going. It's been an impossibly difficult year for so many. I want to pay special tribute to our key workers, particularly those in the emergency services and those serving abroad in our forces, who, even at this time of year, are doing the vital work of protecting their country. I wish everyone, including the members opposite, a very happy and peaceful New Year. Will the Prime Minister join me?
Prime Minister.
I think, Mr. Speaker, he missed that I paid tribute to our emergency workers at the beginning of the session, Mr. Speaker. But let's see. No, because I think it is important, because he talked about working families. Of course, Mr. Speaker, I want to make sure that we support working families, and that's what we're actually delivering, Mr. Speaker, because all he has to offer them is borrowing £28 billion a year, which all it will do is push up their mortgage rates and push up their taxes. Meanwhile, what have we done? Delivered tax cuts for millions of working families, boosted the national living wage, Mr. Speaker, recruited 50,000 more nurses, 20,000 more police officers, improved our schools. We've cut the cost of net zero for those working families. We've cut the boat crossings by a third, and we've halved inflation. And that's the difference, Mr. Speaker. We're getting on and delivering for working Britain.
I'm not sure if the charge was that he was tone deaf. I'm not sure that final answer. When Keir Starmer basically dialed it right down, it basically just wanted to say Happy Christmas.
Yep. I mean, at the risk of making this about me, I've spent 6 years...
Surely not.
I have spent 6 years writing about the last 6-7 years of Tory politics. And I am bored of covering people who don't understand that politics is not just about policy. It's not just about delivery. It's about taking people with you and about convincing them of your argument. And so many of the people we have seen find that very difficult. Boris Johnson could kind of take people with him. He didn't know where he was going, and he often didn't get there. Theresa May didn't know where she was going and had no idea how to get there, and then was unable to take people with her even when she did work it out. Rishi Sunak kind of knows where he's going, but he seems totally incapable of taking anyone with him, including several factions of his own party. And that, I think, is what has been revealed, big time today. And it was a game of two halves, but the other way around this week.
Yeah.
Starmer started well, but Sunak kind of dealt with it fine. And then he just turned into shrill, snippy Rishi And I think he's made a haulix of the last
Maybe
three
there's something
questions.
in that last week when Keir Starmer went 3 questions serious, 3 jokey. He seemed to sort of lose the plot a bit. We're doing the jokey bit at the beginning and then getting more and more serious, which just denied Sunak any opportunity to laugh and like relax a bit. So instead, it was like the sort of pull the string in the back of the dummy, just read out your targets. It's interesting actually. Some people on the YouTube channel saying that Starmer is using the attack lines he'd use in an election campaign. And Sunak's just basically saying everything is brilliant. That's not going to work with an electorate.
Well, our listeners are incredibly astute, because if you are smart and your strategists are smart, you use PMQs as a testing ground for your campaign slogans, which then come out in the short campaign. I remember hearing from David Cameron the phrase long-term economic plan again and again and again. And of course, that ended up being the sort of frame for their election. I just thought it was so revealing about how Rishi Sunak handled that last question. It clearly discombobulated him that Keir Starmer didn't do a massive attack. Normally that last opportunity, that last question for both leaders is a chance to sort of dump on the other one. And Keir Starmer decided to kind of go statesman and thank the country. And I thought even Rishi Sunak's I did pay tribute actually, right at the point of information. I think you'll find that
On a
actually,
point of order, Mr. Speaker.
I did actually.
I did actually say thank you to the nurses.
I did.
I'm not doing it again.
Exactly.
No, I wouldn't dream of saying it again.
And that sort of that pre-rehearsed dump, it also showed two things to me. A, he's not good at thinking on his feet, because he should at that point been able to sort of think, right, I'm actually going to rip this script up. I'm going to try and match the energy that I've just, he could have said something really statesman-like, look, it has been a very, very difficult year for he could have made a self-deprecating, myself included. But, I thank him for his comments. I hope he and his family have a restful time. But I want people to know that over this Christmas, I'm going to be straining every sinew to come back. We've got to, do the right thing. He could have done a big do the right thing for the country.
Yeah.
It's almost like you should have a career prepping senior politicians for this.
But it's really just getting under the bonnet of it, the mechanics of it, and the fact that actually some weeks he's terrible, but Keir Starmer's team this week, that the way they've used
clever.
the ebb and flow and that business of just basically saying Happy Christmas at the end,
and it's
just
playing the
suck
other
it
guy
out.
as well, because they
Yeah.
know how he responds to this stuff.
And just very quickly, but by kind of doing that thank you Britain question at the end, it's almost like not doing a question.
Yeah.
Because sometimes the other trick you can do at PMQs as leader of the opposition is stop after 5, and it really does the other person's head in, because they haven't done that. That means they can't do their dump on you.
Yeah.
So he practically didn't do a question and allowed himself to look statesman-like, and it caught Rishi Sunak
He asked
out.
him if he wanted to wish everybody a happy Christmas, and he didn't. Right, up next, Lara Spirit has been watching the best of the rest. Did Rishi Sunak get any better? We'll find out next on Times Radio.
Politics without the boring bits. Matt
PMQs Unpacked, the key exchanges. Lara Spirit was watching the best of the rest. How was it, Lara?
It was good.
Yes! Finally!
I practiced saying
Very
that.
good, very good. Was it good?
Yeah,
I mean, to
it
be honest,
genuinely
I'd
was
just say
interesting.
that every week just to keep him quiet.
Well, exactly. No, I'm well advised. There were moments that were genuinely very interesting. Yes.
And what are they? Where are we going first?
We're going obviously first to Stephen Flynn, SNP Westminster leader. And this question, ceasefire in Gaza, is raised. We haven't heard this in PMQs for a fair amount of time, or at least it hasn't led in the way that at the beginning of the conflict, the most recent conflict, it had. So I think it's worth listening to this. And it's a pretty punchy question from Stephen Flynn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Prime Minister please share his Christmas message for children being bombed in Gaza this winter?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, nobody wants to see this conflict go on for a moment longer than necessary. We urgently need more humanitarian pauses to get all the hostages out and to get life-saving aid into Gaza to alleviate the suffering of the Palestinian people. And we have been consistent that we support what is a sustainable ceasefire, which means Hamas must stop launching rockets into Israel and release all the hostages.
It was a punchy question. And again, in terms of the art of asking questions at PMQs, keeping it short is often better.
Yeah, and I mean, you heard the shouting that Rishi Sunak was subjected to there as well. And there was a question later on the crimes of sexual violence from Theresa Villiers, perpetrated by Hamas, that we've seen in reports, which Rishi Sunak answered to. So it was a PMQs from the backbenches where we did see a number of questions on that. But can I move on to the next one?
Yeah, where are we going next?
We are going to Stephen Timms, who asks this question that I think a number of people have been asking since we saw that big announcement on legal migration at the beginning of last week. It feels like such a long time ago that now, but obviously actually semi-recently, on spousal salaries and the threshold needed to come here, and the possibility, or indeed under the current system, the likelihood that many marriages might need to be, or weddings might need to be called off on account of this. And I think an interesting news line, because
38,000 is the new threshold.
And Rishi Sunak confirming here that, which I don't think we've heard before, at least I've certainly missed it, that there are transitional arrangements that the Home Office are looking at the moment, that they're planning on announcing soon, to make sure that those who are further down the line on this might actually still be able to marry the people they love. So have a listen to this question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The marriage plans of thousands of couples were dashed last week by the sudden announcement of a big increase in the salary requirement for a spouse visa. Can the Prime Minister give any reassurance to those with very well advanced marriage plans which appear now to have been scuppered, and to families already in the UK who need to extend their stay who won't comply with the new rules? Can he at least offer some transitional help for families, or does his party's support for the family now only apply to the highly paid?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we have a long-standing principle that anyone bringing dependents to the UK must be able to support them financially. We should not expect this to be at the taxpayers' expense, and the threshold hasn't been raised in over a decade. It's right that we have now brought it in line with the median salary. The family immigration route, as he knows, does contain provision for exceptional circumstances, but more generally it's also right, and I can tell him, to look at transitional arrangements to ensure that they are fair, and the Home Office are actively looking at this and will set out further information shortly.
That's interesting. Transitional arrangements and looking at it, so it might not be quite such a
hard and sharp break that if you've already planned to come and get married here, you might not have to be calling it off. So I think that was one of the big moments in that big package of measures that were announced last week that got quite a lot of subsequent attention, was this question that actually it could apply to pretty imminent arrangements. And there was concern also from some Conservative MPs that I spoke to about that if they get the management of that wrong, it might not work in their favour. And fundamentally, it also might distract from what they think is otherwise a positive, in their view, tough package of reforms.
Very good, very good. Finally, a Tory MP?
Tory MP James Morris, I include this because it was one of quite a few semi-critical questions from the backbenchers today on issues that I think you would expect the Liberal Democrats possibly, but certainly Labour, to raise issues around healthcare, issues around rivers and dental care. But this is about the Mental Health Act. And you remember that Keir Starmer used that Prime Minister's questions just before the budget to go on mental health. This is something that those around Keir Starmer want the Labour leader to be talking about a bit more, and I think we should expect to hear more from them on this area. They say, especially among young people, it's a much more salient issue with the electorate than people often think, and James Morris making it quite clear that he thinks a number of Conservative MPs might well agree with that assessment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister is rightly focused on taking long-term decisions to improve the lives of people in this country. So can I make a suggestion? Our mental health legislation is 40 years old, and we made a manifesto commitment in 2017 and 2019 to reform the Mental Health Act, because we have people with learning disabilities and autism sectioned under the Act being kept an inappropriate accommodation for long periods. We have people sectioned under that Act not receiving the compassionate care that they deserve and, in a sense, are criminalised. And we have people sectioned under that Act who have their mental health condition re-stigmatised by the act of sectioning. So, would the Prime Minister, in the absence of a bill in the King's Speech, would the Prime Minister agree to meet with me and other like-minded colleagues to discuss how we might be able to take forward reform of the Mental Health Act, because it simply isn't fit for the 21st century?
Well, can I thank my honourable friend for raising this important issue? He's absolutely right about the work that needs to be done, and I'm grateful to the Joint Committee on the draft Mental Health Bill, and our intention is, when parliamentary time allows, to bring forward a bill. I'd be happy to meet with him and colleagues to discuss this, but also just remind everyone that we are undertaking the largest expansion of mental health services in a generation, £2.3 billion of extra funding by March of next year, increasing capital investment in mental health urgent care centres, and, under the long-term workforce plan, the largest expansion of the mental health workforce that we've ever seen in this country.
Spell that.
And this has been a long-running thing across parties, isn't it, Lara, about what's happening to the Mental Health Act?
Yeah, but also it was a manifesto commitment, and I think some of the more loyal Tory MPs will bristle a little bit at hearing that fact repeated there in the Commons by James Morris. But even so, I think it's an interesting and important question. This was something Theresa May was known to be quite passionate about, although it's not that we've heard anything disobliging from her on this question. But I think an interesting omission in the King's Speech, and certainly one to come up.
And when you look at the story we had on the front of the paper at the weekend, which is about the sort of the widening gulf between haves and have-nots, exacerbated by lockdown, one of the areas that was the starkest was mental health. Yeah. And it's obviously a very serious subject that tends not to be a political football, but I think it's one where everybody
and
governments all strive to do more, really. Some
critics of the government might suggest they could have spent this week rushing through the promised changes to the Mental Health Act instead, which might have had a real-life impact in the real world, but that's not for me to say.
I mean, it's also just quickly on the back-to-work budget and the plans that Jeremy Hunt and Mel Stride, his Work and Pension Secretary, have on economic inactivity and getting that number down. This is a really big part of that. The long-term sickness numbers do include a number of people with mental health problems. That's rising, so this is a big part of even the most basic of economic assessments.
Well, there we are. Lara Spirit, you're right, it was good. Lara Spirit, Red Box editor, will be in your inbox at
3 p.m.
with your last PMQs Unpacked email of 2023. Lara, thank you for all of your this is your third appearance on the show today.
Hopefully my last.
And you'll be back tomorrow.
I will be.
We'll be back tomorrow with Spirit the Archive. Tim, happy Christmas.
Thank you very much, man.
Thank you for all of your just demolition of jokes.
It's been an interesting year, hasn't it?
Can we top Zippy next year? That's the question.
That is the question.
Very good. PMQs Unpacked returns in the new year. Up next, we asked, does Armando Iannucci's poem work as a stage play? We'll find out next on Times Radio.